All right. Welcome back to Blackburn News, where everything is connected. And all the viewers are smarter than the average bear. And we're going to do another episode of a good old fashioned book reading. And right now it's suddenly a lovely May day in Los Angeles. And wherever you are, it might be equally as lovely, or maybe it's dark. Maybe it's just a Saturday night. We're live on Rockfin, YouTube, on Twitter. If you're on Twitter, check in, if you will. Give us a shout. Give us a holler. What's up, Twitter people? I'm trying to find the feed on Twitter. There we go. All right. Very good. Greetings. Okay. In these book readings, I ask that y'all donate something, $1 even. And if you notice, or whatever you can, it's still free otherwise. If you notice, there are just direct donate links below. Pretty pleased with a cherry on top. If you're going to contribute to the show today, please do it by the direct donate links. Thank you. All right, let's get into it. We left off at chapter 11, and now we are here to chapter 12. Bypassing the imaginary relationship part for a moment, what about the real situation? Unknowable, of course, as per above, but consider this aspect of it. Recent extinctions include the Saudi gazelle, the Japanese sea lion, the Caribbean monk seal, the Christmas Island pipistrelle, the Bramble Cay melamis, the vaquita porpoise, the Alagoas foliage gleanet, the cryptic tree hunter, Spix's macaw, the po'olui, the northern white rhino, the mountain tapir, the Haitian solenodon, the giant otter, Atwater's prairie chicken, the Spanish lynx, the Persian fallow deer, the Japanese crested ibis, the Arabian oryx, the snub-nosed monkey, the Ceylon elephant, the Indus, Zanzibar's red colobus, the mountain gorilla, the white-throated wallaby, the Walia ibex, the AA, the vicuna, the giant panda, the monkey-eating eagle, and an estimated 200 more species of mammals, 700 species of birds, 400 species of reptiles, 600 species of amphibians, and 4,000 species of plants. The current rate of extinctions compared to the geological norm is now several thousand-fold faster, making this the sixth great mass extinction event in Earth's history, and thus the start of the Anthropocene in its clearest demarcation, which is to say, we are in a biosphere catastrophe that will be obvious in the fossil record for as long as the Earth lasts. Also, the mass extinction is one of the most obvious examples of things done by humans that cannot be undone, despite all the experimental de-extinction efforts and the general robustness of life on Earth. I'm going to stop here real quick, and please, if somebody could let me know if the sound is okay. Denver's here, so I guess it is. Nobody said anything to the contrary, so I'll keep going. Ocean acidification and deoxygenation are other examples of things done by humans that we can't undo, and the relation between the ocean acidification, deoxygenation, and the extinction event may soon become profound, and that the former may stupendously accelerate the latter. Evolution itself will, of course, eventually refill all these emptied ecological niches with new species. The pre-existing plenitude of speciation will be restored in less than 20 million years. Anytime he broke a sweat, his heart would start racing, and soon enough, that was the end of chapter 12. This is the beginning of chapter 13. By the way, we're going to go for about an hour-ish, give or take. So, cool. Got a couple people on Rockfin. Thanks for tuning in. And chapter 13. Anytime he broke a sweat, his heart would start racing, and soon enough, he would be in the throes of a full-on panic attack. Pulse at 150 beats a minute or more. It didn't matter that he knew he was safe, and that this panic reaction was to something that had happened long before. It didn't matter that he lived outside Glasgow now, and had a job in a meat processing plant that gave him access to refrigerated rooms where the temperature was kept just a few degrees above freezing. By the time an attack started, it was too late. His body and mind would be plunged instantly into another terrible tornado of biochemicals, pounding through his arteries like crystal meth at its paranoid worst. This was what people called post-traumatic stress disorder. He knew that. He had been told it many times. PTSD, the great effect of our time. As one of his therapists had explained to him, one of the identifying characteristics of the disorder was that even when you knew it was happening to you, that didn't stop it from happening. In that sense, the therapist admitted the naming of it was useless. Diagnosis was necessary but not sufficient, and what might be sufficient wasn't at all clear. There were differing opinions, differing outcomes. No treatment had been shown to be fully effective, and most were still largely experimental procedures. Exposure to events like the event. No. He had tried this on a visit to Kenya, out every day in temperatures that crept closer and closer to the unlivable. That had resulted in daily panic attacks, and he had curtailed the trip and gone back to Glasgow. Virtual environments in which to explore aspects of the event. No. He had played video games that made him relive parts of the experience in ways he could control. But the games were as ugly as any M-rated travesty. Panic attacks were frequent during the games or not. Rehearsal therapy. He had written accounts of the event while on beta blockers, repeating this exercise over and over. Sleepy all the time because of the beta blockers. Memoir as automatic writing. I tried to get people inside. I had a water tank in the closet. I hid what I had. The pistol barrel was a little black circle. Everybody was dead. No good. Just more blurry, sick, gasping panic attacks, more nightmares. About half the time he fell asleep. He had nightmares that woke him in a cold sweat. Sometimes the images were sadistically cruel. After waking from one of these dreams, he had to try to warm back up, so he would wiggle his cold toes, toss and turn, try to forget the dream, try to get back to sleep. But it took hours, and sometimes it didn't work. The next day, he would operate like a slow zombie, get through the day by working mindlessly or by playing video games, mostly games in which he bounced from point to point in a low-G environment, asteroid hopping. His therapist talked about trigger events, about avoiding triggers. What they were glossing over with this too convenient metaphor was that life itself was just a long series of trigger events. That consciousness was the trigger. He woke up, he remembered who he was, he had a panic attack. He got over it and got on with his day as best he could. The command not to think about certain things was precisely a mode of thinking about that thing. Repression, forgetting. He had to learn to forget. Perpetual distraction was impossible. He wanted to get better, but he couldn't. Ola, who is this? Oh, it's I know it is. It's not displaying your name, so confused. Ola from X, thank you. American Nihilist, what's up? He woke up, he remembered who he was, he had a panic attack. He got over it and got on with his day as best he could. The command not to think about certain things was precisely a mode of thinking about that thing. Repression, forgetting. He had to learn to forget. Perpetual distraction was impossible. He wanted to get better, but couldn't. Cognitive behavioral therapy was accepted by many as the best way to deal with PTSD, but CBT was hard. He pursued it like a religion calling, like a sidewalk over the abyss. One therapist said to him, when he used that phrase, everyone walks that sidewalk over the abyss. That's life. Mine's a tightrope, he replied. Focusing on balance was necessary at all times. In that sense, distractions were actually contraindicated. If you were distracted enough, then a single misstep could send you plunging into the abyss. Constant vigilance. But this too was bad, as just another way of thinking about it, of paying attention to it. No, hypervigilance was part of the disorder, so there was no way out. No way but dreamless sleep, or death, or certain drugs. Anti-anxiety drugs were not the same as antidepressants. They were meant to foil the brain's uptake of fight or flight stimulants, to give consciousness a bit of time to calm the system down by realizing there was no real danger. These drugs had unwanted side effects, sure. Flatness of effect, yes. It was even part of what you wanted. If you killed all feelings, the bad feelings would necessarily be among them and therefore less likely to appear, even if they were the first ones in line ready to pop. But if you did accomplish the flattening of all feeling, then what? March through life like an automaton, that's what. Eat like fueling an old car. Exercise, hoping to get so tired you could fall asleep and make it through the night. Try not to think. Try not to feel. So after many months of that, after years of that, he went back to India. He needed to try to see if it would help. Until he tried it, he wouldn't know. It would be something like aversion therapy, or rather immersion therapy. Go right back to the scene of the crime. Plus, he had an idea that had begun to obsess him. He had a plan. He landed at Delhi, took the train to Lucknow, got off at the station, and got on a crowded bus out to his town. The sights and smells, the heat and humidity, they were all triggers, yes. But since consciousness was the real trigger, he steeled himself and looked out the bus's dusty window and felt the sweat pouring out of his skin, felt the air pulsing in and out of his lungs, felt his heart pound inside him like a child trying to escape. Take it. Live on. He got off at the bus stop in the town's central square. He stood there looking around. People were everywhere, all ages, Hindu and Muslim, as before. The difference was subtle, and sometimes not there at all, but his eye had been trained to note the signs. A tikka, a particular rounded cap, the usual mix that his town had always had, but back to Akbar and before. All appeared to him as it had 4 years earlier. There was no sign that what had happened had ever happened. Surely there must be a memorial at least. He walked toward the lake, feeling his heart hammer, his skin burn. His clothes were soaked with his sweat. He drank from the water bottle he had in his day pack, just a sip each time, and yet soon it was empty. Everything pulsed. His eyes stung with sweat. Behind his wraparound sunglasses, he was weeping furiously. The polarization of the glasses was not enough to keep bursts of light from shattering in his retinas. Sights incoming like needles in the eyeball everywhere he looked. The lake was the same. How could it be the same? How could they not have drained it, built over the site with some mausoleum or temple or just an apartment block or a bazaar? Then again, who was there to remember what had happened or what it had been like that week? There were no survivors to be haunted by this place. As for those who had come in and cleaned it up, disposed of the bodies, well, it had been just one town of many, All of them were the same. There was no reason to fixate on this one. No, he was the sole survivor. No one else had seen what he had seen and survived to remember it. For all the people walking in on this crowded, narrow sidewalk, this sad little pastiche of a Cornish, it was only what it was today. No sign of a plague, much less a memorial in the old martial style. He walked back to the bus station. After some thought and a trip to an open-walled store to buy more bottled water, he walked to his old offices. The building was still there. The offices were occupied by lawyers and accountants and a dentist. Next door was a Nepali restaurant that hadn't been there before. It was just a building. What had happened up there in those rooms? He sat on the curb, suddenly too weak to stand. He was quivering. He put his head in his hands. It was all there in his head, every hour of it, every minute of it, the water tank in that closet. He got up and walked back to the bus station and took the next bus back to Lucknow. There he called a number he'd been given. A man answered in Hindi. In his bad Hindi, he asked if he could speak in English, then switched over when the man said, "Yes, what?" "I was there," Frank said. "I was here during the heat wave. I'm an American. I was with an aid group here doing development work. I saw what happened. Now I'm back." "Why?" "I have a friend who told me about your group." "What group?" "I was told it's called Never Again, devoted to various kinds of direct action." Silence from the other end. "I want to help," Frank said. "I need to do something." More silence. Finally, the man said, "Tell me where you are." He was outside the train station for an hour, miserably hot. When it seemed he would wilt and fall, a car drove up to the curb and two young men jumped out and stood before him. "You are the Ferengi who called?" "Yes." One of them waved a wand over him, while the one who had spoken patted him down. "All right, get in." When he was in the front seat, passenger side, the driver took off with a squeal. The men behind him blindfolded him. We don't want you to know where we are taking you. We won't harm you, not if you are what you say you are." "I am," Frank said, accepting the blindfold. "I wish I weren't, but I am." No replies. The car made several turns, fast enough to throw Frank against the door or the restraint of his seatbelt. A little electric car, quietly humming, and quick to speed up or slow down. Then the car stopped and he was led out and up some steps into a building. His blindfold was removed. He was standing in a room filled with young men. There was a woman there, too, he saw, alone among a dozen men. All of them regarded him curiously. He told them his story. They nodded grimly from time to time, their gleaming eyes fixed on him. Never had he been looked at so intently. When he was done, they glanced at each other. Finally, the woman spoke. "What do you want now?" "I want to join you. I want to do something." They spoke in Hindi among themselves more quickly than he could follow. Possibly it was another language like Bengali or Marathi. He didn't recognize a single word. "You can't join us," the woman told him after they were done conferring. We don't want you. And if you knew everything that we did, you might not want us. We are the children of Kali, and you can't be one of us, even if you were here during the catastrophe. But you can do something. You can carry a message from us to the world. Maybe that can even help, we don't know. But you can try. You can tell them that they must change their ways. If they don't, we will kill them. That's what they need to know. You can figure out ways to tell them that. "I'll do that," Frank said. "But I want to do more." "Do more then, just not with us." Frank nodded, looked at the floor. He would never be able to explain. Not to these people, not to anyone. "All right then, I'll do what I can." That was chapter 13. Heading into chapter 14. And real quick, just going to check in on everybody and see that everybody's doing okay. All right, cool. Great. Fantastic. We had to leave. It was too dangerous to stay. I was a doctor. I ran a small clinic with an assistant and 3 nurses and a couple who ran the office. My wife taught piano and my children went to school. Then rebels from our area began fighting the government and troops moved into town and people were being killed right on the street. Even some kids from the school my children went to. And one day our clinic was blown up. When I went to it and saw the wreckage, looked from the street right into my examination room, I knew we had to leave. Somehow, we were on the wrong side. I went to a friend who had been a journalist before the war and asked him if he could put me in touch with a smuggler who could get us on the way to someplace safe. I did not have any particular idea about where that might be. Any place was going to be safer than where we were. When my friend understood what I was asking him, he rounded the table and gave me a hug. "I'm sorry it's come to this," he said. "I will miss you." This struck me like a knife in the heart. He knew what it meant, this move. I didn't know, but he did. And when I saw what he knew in his face, I sat down in my chair as if shot. My knees buckled. People say this is a figure of speech, but really, it is a very accurate account of what happens when you get a big shock. It's something in the body, a psychological thing, although I can't explain the mechanism. The smuggler was expensive, so much so that only those who had some considerable savings would be able to leave by using one. Most of my townspeople were stuck, but we could afford it. So I met my friend one night at our usual cafe, and he had a man with him. This man was polite but distant, professional. He asked to see my money, asked about my family, when I could be ready, that sort of thing. He said he could get us into Turkey and then Bulgaria, and after that Switzerland or Germany. I went to the bank and withdrew the money, then went home and told my wife, and we told the children to pack 1 suitcase each, that we were going on a trip. That night at midnight, a car pulled up to our apartment curb, and we went downstairs, put our suitcases in the trunk, and piled in the back of the car. As we drove off, I looked at out the car window at our apartment and realized I would never see it again. All that was over. I had my routines. I like to go down to the cafe after work or late at night when it had cooled, drink coffee and play backgammon and talk to my friends. My wife and I got together with a few couples, made meals and watched their kids. We knew the people who ran the grocery and the local stores. We had all that, just like anyone. I remember what it was like, but just barely. It's the end of chapter 14. Chapter 15. Taking notes for Badim on regular Monday meeting of ministry executive group. I'll clean these up later to give them to him. Mary Murphy convening her leadership team in seminar room next to her office, Hochstrasse. I should have gone to the bathroom. Badim on Mary's left, then 13 division heads seated around the table, the rest of us behind them against the walls. George is going to fall asleep. Tatiana V, legal. Just heard this morning World Court declined to take up her Indian case. Not happy. Ibeni Hall, infrastructure, poached from Namcor. Jürgen Atzgen, Zurcher, gets to commute from his house down lake. Insurance and reinsurance. Swiss revet. Swiss, I guess that's Army vet. Bob Wharton, NatCat, American ecologist, mitigation and adaptation. Climate lead, Adele Elia, French, coordinating our climate science. Started as a glaciologist, hates meetings like this. Once said so right in the meeting. Lived 8 years on glaciers, she said. Wants back there. As for world cryosphere, it's still melting. Huo Kaming, ecologist, Hong Kong. Biosphere studies, habitat restoration, refugia creation, animal protection, rewilding, biologically based carbon drawdown, watershed governance, groundwater recharge, the commons, the Half Earth campaign. She can do it all. Esteban Escobar, Chilean, oceans, prone to despair. Elena Quintero, agriculture, Buenos Aires. She and Estefan joked about Argentina-Chile rivalry. She cheers him up very skillfully. Indra Dalit, Jakarta, geoengineering, works with Bob and Jurgen. Dick Bosworth, Australian, economist, a card, taxes and political economy, our reality check. Janice Athena, AI, internet, all things digital, very digital herself. Esmeri Zayed, third of the E-Gals, Jordanian-Palestinian, refugees, liaison to UNHCR. Rebecca Tallhorse, Canada, Indigenous Peoples Rep and Outreach. Mary starts meeting by asking for new developments. Mbeni, looking into plan to redirect fossil fuel companies to do decarbonization projects. Capabilities strangely appropriate. Extraction and injection both use the same tech, just reversed. People, capital, facilities, capacities, all these can be used to collect and inject, either by way of cooperation or legal coercion. Keeps oil companies in business, but doing good things. Tatiana looks interested. Rest of group looks skeptical. Carbon capture and reinsertion into empty oil wells are both dubious as a reality. Mary, look into it more. We've got to have it. From what the calculations say about how much the natural methods can grab. Jurgen, insurance companies in a panic over last year's reports. Payouts at about 100 billion USD a year now, going higher fast, as in hockey stick graph. Insurance companies insured by reinsurance. These now holding short end of stick, tall end of stick, can't charge premiums high enough to cover payouts, nor could anyone afford to pay that much. Lack of predictability means reinsurance companies simply refusing to cover environmental catastrophes, the way they don't insure war or political unrest, etc. So, end of insurance, basically. Everyone hanging out there uninsured. Governments, therefore, payer of last resort, but most governments already deep in debt to finance, meaning also reinsurance companies. Nothing left to give without endangering belief in money. Entire system, therefore, on brink of collapse. Hey, Gene, glad you're here. Thanks for listening. Mary, what means collapse? Jurgen, mean. Money no longer working as money. Silence in room. Jurgen adds, so you can see why reinsurance hoping for some climate mitigation. We can't afford for the world to end. No one laughs. Bob Wharton, some things we can mitigate, some we can't. Some things we can adapt to, others we can't. Also, we can't adapt to some things we are now failing to mitigate. Need to clarify which is which. Mainly need to tell adaptation advocates they're full of shit. Bunch of economists, humanities professors, they have no idea what talking about. Adaptation, just a fantasy. Mary halts Bob rant very skillfully. Sympathetic squint as she chops air with hand. Preaching to choir, she suggests. Moves along to Adele and the rest. Adele, you think that's bad? Joke gets laugh. The big Antarctic glacial basins, mainly Victoria and Totten, hold ice sliding downhill faster and faster, will soon be depositing many thousands of cubic kilometers of ice into the sea, now looking like could happen in a few decades. Sea level rise 2 meters for sure, maybe more, 6 meters. But 2 meters enough. Doom for all coastal cities, beaches, marshes, coral reefs, many fisheries. would displace 10% of the world's population, disrupt 20% food supply, like a knockout punch to dazed fighter. Civilization kaput. Jurgen throws up hands. Cost of this cannot be calculated. Calculate it, Mary orders him. Jay frowns, pondering big picture in his head. A quadrillion. Yes, really. 1,000 trillion is not too high. Maybe 5 quadrillion. Dick. So just call it infinity. Adele. Number of species threatened with extinction now at Permian levels. Piling it on here. Permian, the worst extinction ever. Now on course to match it. Excuse me, I'm trying to get my microphone situated. Kaming. 99% of all meat alive is made of humans and their domestic beasts. Cattle, pigs, sheep, goats. Wild creatures, 1% of meat alive. And suffering. Many species gone soon. M. Soon. K. Like 30 years. Estavas. Only 20% of the fish now in oceans are wild fish. Mary ends discussion. Chop chop. Regards team. Speaks slowly. MFTF has a budget of 60 billion USD per year. Big. But world GDP 100 trillion a year. Half that GWP is so-called consumer spending by prosperous people, means non-essential buying of things that degrade biosphere. Ship going down. Parasite killing host. Even the productive half of GWP, food and health and housing, burning up world. In short, fucked. Team watches her. So, have to find ways to spend our 60 billion that strike at leverage points. Dick. Our money not enough to matter. Have to change laws. That's our leverage point. Spend our money on changing laws. Tatiana likes this. Imberry. Critical infrastructure needs funding. Elena. Ag improvements. Mary chops discussion. Chop, chop, chop. Stop. We need to lever change and fast. However we can, by whatever means necessary. Badim, surprised by this last statement, I'm not sure why, looks at Mary, surprised. It's the end of chapter 15. Heading into chapter 16. Hope you all are relaxing or just listening, however you're listening. Should be the end of my coffee drinking for today. Seeing as it's almost 5 p.m. Entirely too much caffeine in the last few days. Chapter 16. Possibly some of the richest 2% of the world's population have decided to give up on the pretense that progress or development or prosperity can be achieved for all 8 billion of the world's people. For quite a long time, a century or two, this prosperity for all goal had been the line taken. That although there was inequality now, if everyone just stuck to the program and did not rock the boat, the rising tide would eventually float even the most high and dry among them. But early in the 21st century, it became clear that the planet was incapable of sustaining everyone alive at Western levels. And at that point, the richest pulled away into their fortress mansions, bought the governments, or disabled them from acting against them, and bolted their doors to wait it out until some poorly theorized better time, which really came down to just the remainder of their lives. And perhaps the lives of their children, if they were feeling optimistic. Beyond that, après moi le déluge. A rational response to an intractable problem, but not really. There was scientifically supported evidence to show that if the Earth's available resources were divided up equally among all 8 billion humans, everyone would be fine. They would all be at adequacy. And the scientific evidence very robustly supported the contention that people living at adequacy and confident they would stay there, a critical point, were healthier and thus happier than rich people. So the upshot of that equal division would be an improvement for all. Rich people would often snort at this last study, then go off and lose sleep over their bodyguards, tax lawyers, legal risks, children crazy with arrogance, love not at all fungible, overeating and overindulging generally, resulting health problems, ennui, and existential angst. In short, an insomniac faceplant into the realization that science was once again right. That money couldn't buy health or love or happiness, although it has to be added that a reliable sufficiency of money is indeed necessary to scaffold the possibility of those good things. The happy medium, the Goldilocks zone in terms of personal income. According to sociological analysis, seemed to rest at around $100,000 a year, or about the same amount of money that most working scientists made, which was a little suspicious in several senses, but there it stood, data. And one can run the math. The 2000 Watt Society, started in 1998 in Switzerland, calculated that if all the energy consumed by households were divided by a total number of humans alive, each would have the use of about 2,000 watts of power, meaning about 48 kilowatt hours per day. The society's members then tried living on that amount of electricity to see what it was like. They found it was fine. It took paying attention to energy use, but the resulting life was by no means a form of suffering. It was even reported to feel more stylish and meaningful to those who undertook the experiment. So, is there energy enough for all? Yes. Is there food enough for all? Yes. Is there housing enough for all? There could be. There's no real problem there. Same for clothing. Is there health care enough for all? Not yet, but there could be. It's a matter of training people and making small technological objects. There is no planetary constraint on that one. Same with education. So all the necessities for a good life are abundant enough that everyone alive could have them. Food, water, shelter, clothing, health care, education. Is there enough security for all? Security is the feeling that results from being confident that you will have all the things listed above, and your children will have them too. So it is a derivative effect. There can be enough security for all, but only if all have security. If 1% of the humans alive controlled everyone's work and took far more than their share of the benefit of that work, why also blocking the project of equality and sustainability however they could, that project would become more difficult. This would go without saying, except that it needs saying. To be clear, concluding in brief, there is enough for all, so there should be no more people living in poverty, and there should be no more billionaires. Even enough should be a human right, a floor below which no one can fall, also a ceiling above which no one can rise. Enough is as good as a feast or better. Arranging this situation is left as an exercise for the reader. I just have to pause and say I really like this chapter, because I agree with it. I think there is enough for everybody to live, better than a little better than subsistence farming. But there isn't really all that. There's nothing wrong with that either. But nobody has to be dirt poor, and nobody should be wealthy beyond imagination. And it really actually speaks to the reality that actual, real, practiced communism is the best word for it, would be the ideal. That would be the ideal for everybody on the planet. There would be nothing, there's nothing wrong with the idea of capping salaries. I think is an idea whose time has come, and it's brilliant. There's another chapter in this book where they talk about giving the wealthy or the corporate, overlords like $5 million to walk away or something like that. And I think even that is too much. Like nobody should have $5 million. It gives someone too much power, too much influence, Anyways, I rather like that chapter, and especially the idea of a maximum wage. They're saying nobody needs more than $100,000. Absolutely. Even in the inflated places that, New York, LA, in all the states where the standard of living is quite high. If you can't live on $100,000, you're doing too much. Seriously, you're doing too much. Anyways, that's enough of my commentary. Let's read a couple more chapters if we can. This is chapter 17. Today we're here to inquire who actually enacts the world's economy. Who are the ones who make it all go, so to speak? Possibly these people constitute a minority, as it is often said that most people alive today would actively welcome a change in the system. Only a stupid person would say that. Well, and yet I've just said it. Yes, but to go back to the question in hand, who do we think actually enacts the market as much? By which I mean to say, who theorizes it, who implements it, who administers it, who defends it? The police, it being the law. So, but can we then assume that those people who make the laws are deeply implicated? Yes, but lawmakers are often lawyers themselves, notoriously bereft of ideas. Can we assume they get their ideas about law from others? Yes. And who are some of those others? Think tanks, academics, meaning MBA professors, all kinds of academics. And very quickly, they're students, economists, departments, you mean. The World Trade Organization, stock markets, all the laws, and the politicians and bureaucrats administering the laws, and the police and the army enforcing them. And I suppose the CEOs of all the companies. Banks, shareholder associations, pension funds, individual shareholders, hedge funds, financial firms. Might the central banks indeed be central to all this? Yes. Anyone else? Insurance companies, reinsurance companies, big investors. And their algorithms, right? So mathematicians. The math is primitive. And yet even primitive math still makes mathematicians. The rest of us being so clueless. Yes. Also, I suppose simply prices themselves and interest rates and the like, which is to say simply the system itself. You were asking about the people doing it. Yes, but it's an actor network. Some of the actors in an actor network aren't human. Balderdash. What? You don't believe in actor networks? There are actor networks, but it's the actors with agency who can choose to do things differently. That's what you were trying to talk about. All right, but what about money? What about it? To my mind, money acts as if it worked as gravity does. The more of it you gather together, the more gathering power it exerts, as with mass and its gravitational attraction. Cute. Ultimately, this is a very big and articulated system. Insightful. All right, then, back to the ones who administer our economic system as such and teach others how to work it. And by a not so coincidental coincidence, benefit from it the most. I wonder how many people that would turn out to be. About 8 million. You sure? No. So this would be about 1 in every 1,000 persons alive today. Well done. Thank you. And the programs they've written. Stick to the people. But if the non-human elements of the system were to break, stick to the people. You are almost getting interesting. Who matters the most in that group of 8 million? Government legislators. That's a bad thought. No, it isn't. Why would you say that? Corruption, stupidity, rule of law. But me, no buts. Rule of law. What a weak reed to stand on. Yes. What can we do about that? Just make a stick. Chapter 17, and then give me 1 second, guys. Let's see how long chapter 18 is. It's getting kind of to the end of the hour. Don't know if I'm going to make it through chapter 18, y'all. I think we're going to end right here because we've been going about 50 minutes. And I've got to move on to do some other things in my day. But thank you all for being here. Really appreciate you hanging out with me. This is kind of a relaxing type of session to do. It's an interesting, relaxing live stream kind of thing to do. What's up, Bella? How you doing? Good to see you. Glad you're here. Let me make sure I don't. If anybody has contributed, I want to make sure I'm thanking anybody. As I said in the beginning of the show, I do ask that everybody, donate $1 or more if you can. Please, pretty please use the direct donate links that are in the description box. Those are the only links I have down there. If you could, por favor, if you are going to donate. And checking in on the Rockfins. Say hi to everybody. AREM, Denver. Osama's there. AREM says nobody should have enough to corrupt the entire system at the very least. Yes. I mean, I think that's another benefit of a maximum wage. That nobody would be able to really, conceivably. I'm sure there are other ways to do it, but money is one of the main ways people generate power and influence. So if you limited everybody's income, it would make it a lot harder. I think a maximum wage is probably more important than a minimum wage. Although, the idea of a minimum wage is great. But if you had a maximum wage, I'm pretty sure that the people that didn't, that had less would start to get more, right? Anyways. Because what you going to do with all that money? Which is a lyric in one of my songs, a very, very old song called All That Money. If y'all want to go find that song and go listen to it, it's kind of about all that stuff, all the stuff we're talking about. But anyways, thank you all for hanging out. I'm checking out on Twitter people. What's up? How you doing? Thanks for listening. All right, guys. Thank you so much for being here. I don't know if I missed anybody or not, but I will be back on Monday. Won't be here tomorrow, but I'll be back on Monday at the usual time. And thanks for hanging out, guys. Appreciate you. Until next time. Peace.